Why would you learn a programming language that you know you're never going to use on a real project? That's one of the things we're talking about in today's episode, my interview with Noah Labhart. This is another interview from Squares. My name is Jonathan Cottrell. You're listening to Developer T. My goal on this show is to provide you with the coaching and the insights, the conversations with other developers, like in today's episode, that help you become a better developer, help you level up in your career as a developer. That's the entire point of the show. And I'm thankful to say that I've received many emails and tweets and even in-person thank yous from those of you who are listening to this show, and it is helping you. So I'm really thankful that that's actually happening, that we're finding a way to do this together and to help all of us become better developers, have the right conversations, and constantly having a dedication to learning. So thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Developer T. Noah is a successful app developer. He owns his own company. He was a developer that went out of development and came back. We'll talk about all that stuff in today's episode. I'm going to go ahead and get out of the way. We're going to get to the interview with Noah Labhart. I'm here at Squares with Noah Labhart. Am
Howdy.
I saying that correct?
You said
Labhart.
it perfectly.
Good. Noah is the owner of TouchTap Apps.
That's right.
Tell us what TouchTap does.
So TouchTap is a native mobile development agency. So we focus on native development for iOS and Android. Mm-hmm. That's kind of our bread and butter. We also do back-end development services, front-end, marketing websites, things like that. But our big advertisement we really focus on is mobile.
Yeah. So you did a workshop on animations.
That's right. Yep.
So this crowd, it's really interesting. This crowd is full of people who really, there's a lot of designers. There's a lot of developer designers, front-end devs, people who are not, meaning there's not a ton, it's not a heavy audience of back-end developers, probably not a super heavy audience of native developers either.
That's true. Yep.
So you're kind of bringing this somewhat foreign topic to the table. How did it go? I actually was not in that one. I was in a different workshop at the time. How did the workshop go?
Sure, it went great, and you're spot on. It's a bit of a more technical concept or topic than most people, maybe the crowd is positioned for, so to speak. But it went really well. Everybody was very receptive. Yeah. In fact, I had a room full of just designers and one web developer, so no iOS guy. So I didn't look.
Oh wow!
I didn't make any mistakes, at least in their eyes. So that was good. Good. But yeah, it went really well. We had a lot of fun. Got to show them some stuff and animate some things. The primary goal was to sort of bring a little bit more technical content to some of the workshops, a little bit more rich technical content, but ended up getting into a lot of good discussions about what should you animate, what is tasteful animation and versus, like the 90s website with the marquees going over, stuff like that. So it was really good. Really enjoyed it, and I'd love to do it again. Very
cool. Yeah. So animation on iOS. This is probably something that you've done quite a bit of work with.
Sure.
Because animation is so important. Important to do correctly,
right,
and important for a good app to have. Right. That's a very broad way of describing it, but
that's good.
If you have a native application, then really to set yourself into even the average crowd, you probably should have some decent animation going on in the app. So
right, that's absolutely true.
Talking about tasteful animation, how do you know where do you draw the line on what is appropriate and what's over the line or feels gratuitous maybe? Do you feel like that's something that a developer can develop the taste for, or do you think that's something that should be determined well in advance by a designer, or maybe it's a collaboration? Sure,
great questions. So there's two things, and I'll answer both. One, kind of how do you determine like what is the level of animation to figure out what to use, and it's really sort of the best animations are subtle and transparent to the experience.
Yeah,
they're almost unexplainable. Right. Like something just happened when I clicked that button, and I almost didn't see it.
Right.
But it felt really good, and I want to do it again.
Right.
I was telling people in the workshop yesterday, every time I open an app with a parallax image at the top that hides itself, I want to scroll and I want to play with it.
Right. Yeah.
So whatever like functionally helps your users have a better experience, and whatever brings them back to that experience and makes them want to do it again.
Sure.
That's what you want to animate.
Yeah.
And then as far as where it starts, I think it always starts with the designer. I think if us as developers who are true to what we're good at, which at least for me, I'm not a designer. I believe in design, and I believe that I've been very lucky to work with some really good designers. I think it always starts with them because they see things differently than we see things.
Sure.
Now, there's always some good conversations about, okay, we can't do that, or we
Right.
can do that, but that's going to be an extra 6 weeks of development.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's always those type of conversations. But I think it's got to start with the design.
Sure. Yeah. So the designers at TouchTap, or if you work with external agencies,
Right.
How are they typically doing their prototyping? Do they have any particular tools that they use for animation specifically, or
Sure.
do they explain them? How does it work?
Right, that's a great question. So we've kind of run the gamut on a couple of different tools. The ones we've been using recently are Envision, and then Flinto is another one. Mainly, those aren't specifically geared towards animation; they're more towards prototyping.
Yeah.
So anything that we sort of get heavy animation on, it's more of a conversation, really.
Sure. Yeah.
At this point, I think there are some good tools out there that allow you to mock up some good animations. I'm drawing a blank right now of what one of them is called, but there are some out there that focus specifically on that.
Sure. Yeah. There's quite a lot. I know the one you may have been looking for. I don't know, but Marvel is one
Marvel.
of the, yeah.
We've used Marvel before too.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
that escaped me.
Yeah, that's so there's quite a few of these tools, but interestingly, we were actually just having a really good discussion a few minutes ago about tools, and about the purpose of learning a new language.
Right.
As we did a panel, Lauren, my wife, and I were on the panel a little bit ago, and one of the questions that came up, and you were in the room, one of the questions that came up was, how do we keep up to date effectively? And this is something that we talked about on Developer Tea countless times. Very common question for developers to ask because, as people come into the industry, as the industry grows, tooling will grow as well. And the things that we create and the things that we share, that sharing level, it's very similar to if you were to walk into a bookstore and say, all right, it's my job to read every book in this bookstore. Now take that and multiply it by, 10 or 20 times,
Right.
Or maybe more. I don't know. I'm not sure how many books are, on average, how many books are in a bookstore. But
Every week the books always change too.
yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you're talking about a massive amount of information and tooling, and choosing between those tools sometimes feels like you're drawing a lottery ticket. So
Yeah.
what a lot of people do is they effectively buy a bunch of lottery tickets. They spend all of their time and all of their energy trying to figure out which direction to go. And again, something we've talked about quite a few times on the show, but this discussion, I think something that we came on after the fact, a really cool point that we ended up, kind of discovering together was this idea, and you actually mentioned it, the idea that that the creative process is kind of a waste, right? Can you kind of expound on that a little bit?
Sure. So, after your panel, your talk, which y'all did great, by the way, after that talk, we were talking about sort of the tools and such, but I struck a parallel between the creative process. When you're creating something, when from an purely art standpoint, when you're trying to build something, whether it be art, whether it be something like woodworking or things like that, go to the elements, there's a lot of waste.
Yeah.
Right. When you're cutting pieces off, or you're cutting clay off, or things like that, there's a lot of waste to get to the end product. And but it's not about the waste. It's about the end product. So us as developers tend to focus a lot on efficiency and having the answer black and white. No, that's the right thing to do. And kind of arriving at the answer, arriving at the goal or the product that you're trying to output, there's a lot of waste that goes into it.
Yeah.
And even in our own self-development as developers, there's a lot of waste that goes into learning, or it feels like waste. But there's a lot of sort of intrinsic value and learning, shaping value that comes out of that sort of so-called waste of, I may build a project on a weekend in this new technology and then throw it away.
Yeah, exactly. So this is what we arrived at in talking about this was, learning a new programming language, if you walk into that with the only objective being, I want to add to my tool set, then you may miss out on extremely valuable exercises, right? And extremely valuable learning opportunities that you otherwise could have expanded your, what you said, sharpening your axe.
Right.
This idea that, and I mentioned that I've looked at a couple of functional languages, and not enough to add them to my tool set as something that I can regularly use, but instead to change the way that I think, right? And in many ways, this is kind of the same reasoning applies to why people should read books, right? Why people should be exposing themselves to many different ideas. It's not because those books are necessarily going to give them a tangible skill to walk away with and immediately use. Instead, it's a different type of utility. And I think that's a very interesting insight into this learning process. If we view languages, and actually I mentioned this on a recent episode of the show, I can't remember which one, but we talked about languages as a collection of opinions, right? So the same type of logic run through two different languages is going to look different, but it's going to have basically the difference in the syntax is difference in opinions most of the time. So exposing yourself to multiple design opinions, how things should look, or how things can look, can totally change the way you think about the way you're building your thing, right?
Absolutely.
So no matter what you're using. So I write in Ruby relatively often, but I looked at Haskell, and I looked at Elixir and a few other functional languages, and it changed the way I think about the way I write Ruby, right? And the same is true for learning Ruby and then going to JavaScript, or fill in the blank, really. And it's not only limited to programming languages. You can learn a lot from philosophy. You can learn a lot from. So it's this concept that your knowledge is a single bank, rather than your knowledge of programming being a list of capabilities. Right. You're not a machine.
Absolutely. No, that's absolutely true. It gives you a broader perspective. And that's why I love things like squares and circles and conferences we go to, because I feel like just like the tool set, just the people too, hearing about their experiences and opinions and what they're presenting broadens my perspective and sharpens my axe in a different way that makes me think differently, just like you're saying.
Well, it's very, very good insight, actually. Another concept that gets broken at conferences for people in a good way is the perception of the online personas of developers like you or me, or anyone else who's here. We have a constructed version of ourselves that people see online.
Sure.
And we can develop a lot of self-consciousness when we are not in contact with other developers.
Sure, yeah.
We think that other people are learning everything. We think that everyone else is moving faster than we are.
Right. Sure.
And the reality is very different. And when you talk face to face with another developer and you realize that I learned from them, but they also learned from me, now it's a collaborative effort. And now, you're realizing that the value that you have provided to the world, and, it can be very helpful for feeling a sense of a lack of motivation, or a sense of depression, or like you're missing the mark, for example.
Certainly.
So that, I would say, that's really the big value of coming to a conference.
Right. We it's weird to think of it like this, but we work in sort of in the digital world. It's very cold.
Yeah.
Right. We're on Slack all day, or we're on some sort of chat. We're on the web. We're on a computer. But getting face to face and talking to people, there's warmth, and there's something that comes from, there's a vibe of something that comes out of just interacting with people that you can't get, and you start to realize, hey, we're all human, and we're all doing this, and not one of us is better than the others. Maybe we have more skills in certain areas, but
that's it. It is vulnerability, I think. If you look at a computer is completely invulnerable. When you have made a mistake, it will let you know right away,
right.
and with no uncertain terms, right? And so we're faced with our mistakes as developers. It's another kind of background theory, like popular theory that I have at this point, that because developers are constantly facing the reality of our mistakes, right? We constantly are hitting bugs. You go to a live coding session, the API coding session. Most of the changes that you make in tests and a lot, like when people are watching,
right.
you're going to be making mistakes, and becoming comfortable with that is really hard to do when you're only on your own, right? It's easy to have the perception that other developers are not making mistakes because they're only showing you their finished product, right?
Sure.
They're the thing they're proud of.
Right.
And, you're not experiencing that together when you're, only engaging via social media.
Right.
So it's really important to remember that vulnerability being such a key part of a healthy career.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good. It's interesting to see a parallel between social media and like a GitHub repo for a developer.
Sure.
You know, it's like our online persona. Like, here's my perfect code, and this is the way I code all the time.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's very interesting.
Especially for developers who are very much in the public.
Right.
If you write a blog, or if you own a company, or if you host a podcast, people see this whole picture that is presented, that maybe, I don't even have a full control over what people are going to, take away from that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so, if we were to meet in person, it's almost certain that I'm going to be different from that. It'd be very hard to be perfectly transparent in that digital version of myself.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm picking the good pictures to show, and I'm composing the tweets, but you're not hearing the mistakes, right? Or at least hopefully not too many of them. But that's very composed, and that's true for literally every human in this building, right?
Absolutely.
Every person on the planet is prone to those mistakes. So it's very encouraging to see someone that you admire make a mistake. So anyway, all that to say, having that in mind, I think allows us the sense of freedom to pick up a tool only for the fun of it, or only for the experience of it, and not have to worry so much about the perfect efficiency of that learning process, right?
Yeah.
The same with animation, I'm sure.
Right.
You try a lot of different things, right?
Oh,
Bringing it back to the very simple, the simple realities.
Absolutely. No, you're right. And there in the same route that we were talking about earlier with all the tools, the way to animate things in iOS is the same way. There's 5-10 different ways to skin that cat.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And
if not 1,000.
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
And then people abstract it in new ways. And then there's open source libraries that you can use and get in there and really change the way that you know how to do things, and then you feel like you're back to square one.
Right. Yeah.
Like the developer meme that's like, there's bugs, and then you're questioning your career, and then
and then it always ends back at bugs. Right.
Yeah. And you're back here. Oh wait, it's working now. I don't know why, but it's working.
Right. Yeah.
So
that's good. We're talking about mobile applications in today's episode, and if you're a developer and you've been building mobile applications for very long at all, then you probably know that the tool set doesn't really change very often. The applications may change, and the business landscape is changing all the time, but the tool set itself seems to stay relatively the same in terms of what you have to do. Usually you have one screen with some code on it, you're writing that code, then you're saving it, and you're recompiling, and you're watching for the changes in another screen. This has been the way that app development has worked for really decades, with some slight improvements and slightly nicer screens, new typefaces, but ultimately the same kind of model. And today's sponsor is helping change that landscape. Today's sponsor is Fuse, and with Fuse, if you've ever used a game development tool called Unity, Fuse is kind of like Unity for app development. It allows you to write a little bit less code and get a whole lot more done. Fuse installs on Windows or on Mac OS very easily, There's no external dependencies, and the apps compile to iOS, native iOS, and native Android applications. So go and check out what Fuse has to offer to you as a Developer T listener by going to spec.fm/Fuse. That's spec.fm/Fuse. Thank you again to Fuse for sponsoring today's episode of Developer T. So I think this discussion on tooling is so important. With things like native development, you're seeing tons of tools come out. Things like Electron for the desktop and React Native for iOS and Android, and then plenty of other tools that we don't need to necessarily go into. But it's very interesting to hear and encouraging to hear that someone who is working in a native environment, that being open to those tools is still, you're not going against some unwritten code or some unwritten agreement that you're going to be a good developer. Going and testing out React Native doesn't make you a worse developer because you don't know how to code the native side of things, right?
Sure, right. No, that's good. Yeah, I mean, the more knowledge we can have and the more we can sharpen that axe, like we were talking about, is always so good. And if we are remembering what we're developing for, like we're building a product for some reason.
Yeah.
Right. So at the end of the day, the tech is important and how we get there, but it's not the end goal. Right. So if we're building the product and meeting the need, and our clients or customers or users are happy with that, I mean, it's a win.
Yeah. So allow it to be fluid,
right?
And be willing to change.
Mm-hmm.
The most successful developers are, in my opinion, going to be the ones that both are willing and prepare for change. Both of those are important.
Mm-hmm.
If you're only preparing for change, but then you're unwilling when it needs to happen, then you've got a bunch of useless knowledge. Right?
Sure.
If you're only willing to change, but you're unprepared when it needs to happen, then you have a huge gap between the time that it needs to happen and the time that you're able to make it happen.
Right.
No matter how willing you are, that gap is still going to be there. So preparation and getting your mindset ready for adaptation, and that also means getting your code base ready for adaptation, making things in a way that allow them to be changed. That goes beyond just good code quality, and it moves into more of a holistic perspective on what is the purpose of technology? What is the purpose of an application? And typically that purpose is not terminating when you deliver the project.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Typically it lives on. It lives on past that. So.
Right.
All right. This has been fantastic discussion. I like to ask all my guests 2 questions.
Sure.
The first one is, what do you wish more people would ask you about?
That's a great question.
And this was one that we actually were asked in the panel. I finally had somebody ask me that question. That's good.
That is good. So what do I wish people would ask me more about?
And this can be anything. It doesn't have to be just developer.
Oh, okay.
Related.
Gotcha. I enjoy telling the story of how I've gotten to where I've gotten in my technical career. I don't wish that people would be like, no, how did you do it? But because I'm in no way a superstar, but I have kind of gone through some trenches of some different things.
Sure.
And I think there would be some good insight I could offer to new developers. I like mentoring younger developers and junior developers. And I think maybe asking me about that would be cool.
Do you want to actually give a quick, just kind of a rundown of where you did come from, and then
sure,
if people are, if we have time later at another date, or maybe if people want to ask you more, they can reach out.
Absolutely, no, that's great. So I started out doing .NET development in the corporate world. So graduated from Texas A&M and then started doing .NET development straight after. Did that for a year or so, and then went into corporate America for another 8 years and did more project management, implementations, things like that, while doing software development on the side.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's easy to look at that and see, well, you're not doing software, so you're missing, your skills are eroding, or things like that, or you're not. What are you really learning that has to do with software delivery or software development? I actually learned a lot.
Sure.
In the corporate world, and then I actually supported manufacturing for several years. I learned a lot about project management. I learned a lot about delivery. I learned a lot about budgets. I learned a lot about people and managing people and leading people. And without that, I couldn't jump out on my own and be the entrepreneur that I am today. So I did that for 8 years, and then I jumped out after that time and started TouchTap. And then we've been rolling for a few years now, and been doing that, been growing at a really good rate, which is awesome. I have some really good guys that I work with that work for me, and they're fantastic. My latest venture actually is kind of a return to manufacturing, which is my startup. It's called Variable. And it is a on-demand marketplace for manufacturing labor.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
So it's kind of bringing new tech to an old industry.
Yeah.
And a new idea that needs it, or a new idea to an industry that needs it.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
Very exciting type stuff. So.
That's exciting. Yeah.
Thanks.
Congrats.
Appreciate it.
Congrats on the whole journey. It's that would, I think, especially for people who feel like they're stuck in a job they don't want. Knowing that, and this is something I tell listeners all the time, a lot of people try to either rush away from the job that they're at, so they get this sense of excitement and hope about becoming a developer, and they'll go in and give their 2 weeks notice, and then suddenly they're out of a job, and now the clock is ticking, right? And time is not on their side. And whereas before it kind of was on their side, and they lose the ability to be flexible. They lose the ability to get into a new job because they don't have enough time to learn, or they don't have enough time to actually find the opportunity, right? And so they cut their own legs out from under them. And instead of taking that energy and excitement and parlaying it into, study, or parlaying it into some other pursuit, like writing your resume at night. Right. They end up, acting on it in a way that hurts them in the long run. So I think that's really encouraging to hear that you had this relatively long period of time for your career where people were telling you, hey, you're eroding your skills. And in actuality for you, the way you experienced it was, you learn more. You actually could take that experience and use it rather than it just hurting you more and more over, the longer you waited, right?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I think it goes back to every sort of experience or opportunity, whether you feel good about it or not. Like if you're in a job you don't like, you're getting something out of it. There's something that you can take away from that, and it may not be the day to day that you're dreaming of, that you're really going after. Sure. But you can learn something from it and take it, and you'll use it. Yeah. You'll use it later. And when I jumped out of the corporate world, it was scary. It was that same sort of feeling like, okay, well, how are we gonna eat next week and things like that. Right. Yeah. Very, very blessed to have a wonderful wife that supported me through that whilst we still had children, and believed in me and encouraged me through that. So a big props to her. Yeah. Because
hugely helpful to have one of those.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have one of those as well. It's a blessing for sure. That's such a great story. I'm going to go ahead and ask the second of the two questions. If you had 30 seconds to give every developer, regardless of their experience level, a little bit of advice, what would you tell them?
Well, that's a great question. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist in heart, so I'm like trying not to perfect it. I'm just going to go from my gut there.
Sure.
I would encourage all junior developers to do two things. Put in the time to learn and to gain experience. Yeah. I think we're in an age where everything is accessible. Information is accessible everywhere, and it's kind of easy to feel like you know everything already.
Right. Yeah.
But until you jump out there and do it and be a part of projects and do things, you don't know what you don't know, kind of thing. So I would encourage developers to get in, put in the time, work hard, and do what they can do there. And then the second thing, which I wish I could go back and tell myself a couple of times, listen to your older developers, listen to your mentors, listen to your managers. They're in a position to see things differently than the way that you see things. It may not feel like you can't see outside of what you're doing in your coding interface or your IDE. But the reality is, when your head's down in code, you can't.
Yeah.
So those people are really, their opinions are really valuable. So I'd say listen to them.
That's great. That's very good advice. I think that. So I'm going to continue that discussion, and then we'll wrap up. The idea that another developer their ideas are not going to be relevant to you. Even people who are adjacent to you, right? In terms of the structure of your company,
right?
Or even people who are junior to you. This is something I experience all the time at Whiteboard. Developers who have come onto our team that I'm leading that teach me every single day,
right? And
it's a humbling experience, but when you do actually learn to lay down a little bit of the ego or the pride of knowing how to do something, right? When you allow someone else to give you their opinion, then it shifts from a fight, right? Which it could be conflict, a negative conflict, into a positive conflict. And that positive conflict means that you're going to pick between two good options, right?
Right.
And that opportunity is invaluable. A lot of people reject that opportunity and end up not picking the better of two options and just going with an option. And most of the time, if you have the option to pick, you're going to end up with better software in the long run.
Right.
So having somebody come in and collaborate is hugely, hugely valuable. And to your point about mentors, I think the fact that, some people are disillusioned to this idea that an older developer or somebody who is, kind of the old guard, like they don't know. They don't know the stuff that I'm using, or maybe they don't respect the new things that I do respect. I think, it's important to know what pieces of that are valid, right?
Right.
And to know what your differences are. But it's also important to respect the fact that they've been facing problems, and problems are, we all are human, right? They've been facing and solving problems, and their experience will be valuable in one way or another. It's going to be valuable, and you may have a chance to increase learning on both sides of the table.
Yeah,
and usually that's the case.
Totally. I'm going to take that with me. I really like that perspective of the double win too. Two good options.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Awesome. Noah, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jonathan.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Developer Tea. Each and every one of these episodes is thought through very thoroughly to help you become a better developer. That's the entire goal of this show. And I am always open for your feedback and your questions. The problems that you're having, please send them my way. I'd love to hear each and every one of those problems and questions. You can email me at developertea@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at jcuttrell, JCUTRELL, or at developertea. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you again to today's sponsor, Fuse. If you've been developing applications and you're using the same old ways of developing, then maybe it's time for a change. Go and check it out, spec.fm/Fuse. Thank you again for listening. If you don't want to miss out on future episodes and awesome interviews with people like Noah, then subscribe in whatever podcasting app you use. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, enjoy your tea.